Swifters who can save, let's be sure that you're also legends who can load. Reviews, that is. In this video, we're going to load our review data, and we're going to do this by setting up a snapshot listener that listens for changes in our collection inside of a document inside of another collection. Now, we'll first issue this as a challenge. Now, the challenge should be easier than the last one, and the work that we finish after this challenge will work fine for loading existing reviews, but we'll see a few app crashes are caused when we work with spots and reviews that haven't yet been saved. This will give us a chance to recognize cryptic Firebase errors. We'll sleuth out these problems together, and we'll code up a quick and effective solution. Let's code. So here's your entire challenge for this video. We're going to add a load data function to our reviews plural class. Now, one caveat, I'm expecting the load data function that you'll write will properly load all of the reviews that have already been saved, but if you try to save new reviews for a spot that hasn't yet been saved, you'll get a crash. And even after fixing this, we'll notice a second crash. But I want to show you these because Firestore errors aren't all that friendly, and we'll learn to recognize these and to code up solutions. So we can use the load data method that we have in our spots plural class as a guide. Now note that we're also going to need an additional convenience initializer we didn't create in the previous video. Now this initializer is going to go into the review singular class. It's very similar to one in the spot singular class. Both of these are used by the load data methods in their respective plural classes, and they're both used to convert the dictionary data that comes back from a Cloud Firestore document into an object. So in reviews, it initializes a review object from a dictionary. In spots, it initializes a spot object. Now this load data method in reviews will be nearly identical to the one in spots, but since we'll be loading reviews from inside of the reviews collection that's inside of a spot document, we need to pass in a spot document as a parameter to the load data function. So you can swap out the definition line for the old load data with this one here, and this is very similar to what we did in the previous video when we needed to change the function definition line for save data. Now you'll also need to modify the document path when you add the snapshot listener. Now in this load data function, you're not just listening for changes inside of the spots collection. Here you're listening for changes inside of the spots collection for a given spot document in that document's reviews collection. You'll also need to change any references to spot array, spot, and uppercase spot to their reviews equivalent. And once you have a working load data function inside of your reviews class, you will need to do everything to actually load in the reviews data. Now this includes finishing the custom table view cell that will hold the review information. You already laid out this cell. This is the one with the 5 stars in it, the title, and the one-line label containing review text. You want to create a new Swift file that's a subclass of UI table view cell. Why don't you call that spot review table view cell.swift, and then set this new class as the identity for your custom table view cell, that review cell. Now this file should be structured just like any other class file you've done for a custom table view cell, so you'll have your IB outlets in there. You'll also want to create a review property of type review that has a didSet property observer that will update the cell whenever the review has changed, and then update the table view extension in spot detail view controller.swift to work with the new subclass. The setup should be similar to any previous custom table view cells you've worked with. Hint, remember to subclass the table view cell in your table views cell for row@. method. And then finally, make sure you call reviews.loadData. I suggest doing this in view will appear in your spot detail view controller.swift file. So why don't you give this your best shot? Pause. And let's resume and take a look at a solution. Now here's the load data method we're about to write, and again, the code that we wrote before is super reusable. We've just got to change everything we'd outlined in the challenge document. So we're going to have to make sure that we pass in a spot. We're going to have to make sure that we update the path. So we add a snapshot listener that's listening into changes in the reviews collection, which is inside of a particular spot document inside of the spots collection. We also need to change any references to any of the things that were spot specific to things that are review specific. But that's it, so let's code. One of the nice things about being an experienced iOS developer who has built multiple apps is you can rely on and reuse the working code that you've already written. Now, you should always examine any code that you reuse to make sure that you know how it works and to see if it'll work the way you want it to and if it requires any further modification, but we'll do that just now. We're using code that we've written for our spots plural class to load an array of spots is a great way for us to solidify our knowledge on how to load data using a snapshot observer and to make sure we really understand what's going on with the structure of our database that now holds a reviews collection for each spot. So let's open up our spots plural class, highlight and copy the code that we've already written for our load data method, and then open the reviews plural class and paste this load data function just before the last curly in the class. Now we need to pass in a spot parameter to this load data method so that we know which spot contains the reviews that we're going to be loading. So just before completed, we'll add lowercase spot, uppercase spot, comma. Then in the first line of this function, we'll change the document path so that it references the reviews function for this spot. So in this line right after it says db.collectionSpots. We'll add document, and then in parentheses, spot.documentID. That tells us the spot whose reviews we want to see. Then we'll add .collection, and in parentheses, we'll pass in the string reviews, lowercase, dot, and then make sure there's no space followed by snapshot listener, just as we had before. Then we need to change this reference to self.spotArray to self.reviewArray. In the body of the for loop that goes through all the documents in the snapshot, we're referring now not to let spot, but let review equals capital review. And below that will be review.document, not spot.document. In the final line of the for loop, we'll refer to review array, and we're going to be appending the review that we just created above. And we're getting an error here because we're trying to initialize a review with a dictionary parameter. And that's the right thing to do. Document.data will return a dictionary collection of string any key value pairs. We just haven't created the convenience initializer in review.swift that accepts a dictionary yet. So in review.swift, I'll make some space for this convenience initializer just below my last convenience initializer and above the save data method. But why don't we also grab the code from our spot class to use as a template for how to set this up. So over in spot.swift, let's find the convenience initializer in that class that accepts a dictionary, highlight it, copy it, then return to review.swift and paste it into the space we just made. And now we'll have to modify this pretty significantly because review has different parameters than spot does, but at least this will provide a template on how to set things up. So remember what we're doing here. We're working with a dictionary, a collection of key value pairs where the key is a string. And when we performed a save data, we used our dictionary computed property that's also right up here in review.swift. And then we created a dictionary creating keys that were string values with the same names as the properties in review. So here, by saying dictionary, and then in square brackets, the string name, which is the same as a property name, we're saying, hey, look up the value associated with this string. Now the as exclamation point will downcast any value that we get from the type any, which could be anything, to the type needed for our property, a string, a double, etc. But any attempt to read a dictionary value like this could go wrong. There might not be a key in the dictionary with this name. So that's why we need a nil coalescing operator, double question marks after each statement. That ensures that if we get a nil, we'll actually be able to have some kind of default value of the expected type to pass in. And that'd be whatever you put in here, empty string for string, 0.0 for doubles. So the first property in the review class is title. So I'm going to create a constant let title equals dictionary, the value that I'm passing into this initializer here. Then in brackets, I'm passing in the string, the double quotes are important, with the name that's exactly the same as the property name. In this case, that's title. That's what we saved to Cloud Firestore. So this string allows us to find the value for this key in our dictionary read in from Cloud Firestore. Then we'll downcast this with as exclamation point. We'll say string, question mark, since it's a string, but it could return a nil. Then nil coalescing, question mark, says if we get back a nil, don't use a nil, and then whatever we follow that with, that's what we will use instead of a nil. So by adding an empty string here, we're saying, hey, if we get a nil, it's not going to be a nil, it's going to be an empty string. And now that we have this line, I'm just going to highlight it, copy it, and use it as a template for the rest of the properties that I'm reading in as I initialize my new review object. And I'll paste this in 5 more times because I'm going to need to create 5 more constants for values in the dictionary. Then I'm going to highlight and copy the names of the properties above, starting with text, and I'll paste this over the constant name and the dictionary key that I'm going to look up. I'll do the same for rating, but rating's type is different. Instead of a string, it's an int, and if I get a nil, I want to pass in a 0 instead of an empty string. Then after that, I'll copy and paste review user ID and document ID. Now I skipped date deliberately. I'm going to get rid of this extra let title line in the end, and we're going to need to do some conversion for our date. First, let me highlight and delete all of these lines that I'd copied over from my spot initializer. None of these guys are properties in our review class, so let's get rid of those. Now in terms of the date conversion, let's look at what we did when we created our dictionary computed property. Now we had an apple date, which was a property of the review class, but we needed to convert it to a time interval or a double before saving it to Cloud Firestore. And that's because Cloud Firestore does not understand apple dates. It's cool with doubles though. So now we're going to go in the other direction. We're reading back that time interval or double that we saved out to Cloud Firestore, and then we want to convert it to an apple date and pass that date back to the review class date property, which is expecting an apple date. So up here, just in between where I create my rating constant and my review ID, I'm going to add a new line, and I'm going to say let time interval date equals lowercase dictionary, and then in between brackets, I'm going to search for the lowercase date key, and then I'll say as exclamation point to downcast that to upper camel case time interval with a question mark afterward because it might not work. Then double question marks for nil coalescing to deal with this in case I do get back a nil. And just in case I get a nil, I'm going to say capital time interval, open and close parens. That's going to create just a double value 00. Now that we've got our time interval date from Google Firestore, let's convert that to an Apple date. So below this, we'll say let date equals capital date, open parentheses, select this date initializer that has time interval since 1970, and then just pass in this time interval date constant that we created above. We've now got a valid Apple date. And finally, at the end of any convenience initializer, we always have to call back to the default or base initializer, passing in all of the values that the base initializer is expecting. And we've actually already got a line doing this in the initializer just above this. This is the one where we created a blank review, so we can just reuse this line. We just have to replace all the blank values with the names of the valid constants that we've just read in from the dictionary. So I'm going to go up here to this call to self-init from the initializer above, highlight it and copy it, then paste it over the old initializer that I copied over from Spot. I don't want that. We're not working with Spot's properties. And then I just need to make sure that instead of passing in any blanks and zeros, I'm passing in the constants that I created above. So I'll just change the values after the colon. Title, text, rating, review user ID is already in there. Date is going to pass in lowercase date. And finally, document ID. Now let's head over to Spot Detail View Controller, and we'll call this load data function that we just wrote. And why don't we call it in a view will appear? So we'll do that right underneath view did load. I'll type in view will appear, select that. Xcode writes the stub, but make sure that you call super.view will appear and pass in animated. Then we'll call reviews.loadData, and look at that, Xcode knows all about the function we just wrote. It shows up in code completion. If yours isn't, just do a Shift-Command-K for a clean build. The spot is lowercase spot. Double-click on the gray highlighting after completed, and we get the trailing closure format that I like so much. And the only thing we need in there is self.tableview.reloadData. Now let's update our table view. If we scroll down to the extension where we deal with the table view, we can see that we've got it to do in cell for row@. We need to create our custom table view cell Swift file, and then we need to refer to it inside of this method. So why don't we create that file? Right underneath Spot Detail View Controller, I'll right click there, I'll select New File. This is a Cocoa Touch class. Make sure that you're subclassing UI Table View Cell. You don't want Table View Controller, you definitely want Table View Cell. And why don't we name this class Spot Review Table View Cell? Click Next, click Create, and we can delete everything between the class curlies. Now let's create our outlets for this new class. Option click on the main storyboard to get into Assistant Editor mode. Now remember, before we can create our IB outlets, we need to assign this new file as the identity of our review cell. So to do that, open up the Identity Inspector. Be sure that you've clicked on the review cell inside of the Spot Detail View Controller. Find that in the document outline, and then under Class in the Identity Inspector, select Spot Review Table View Cell. Then we'll create our first outlet. That's this label that's labeled Title of Review. Again, Control drag over from the document outline. That's going to be easiest. We'll call that Review Title Label. And the other outlet is this label here that has the default text Tasty and Convenient, and we're going to call that one Review Text Label. Then we can close up our main storyboard, and back in Spot Review Table View Cell, let's go ahead and create our review property. And remember, we're going to set this up as a property observer. So we'll say var lowercase review colon uppercase review exclamation point open and close curlies, then did set open and close curlies. And inside, whenever the review property is changed, we want to say review title label.text equals review.title, and then review text label.text equals review.text. Now let's head back over to Spot Detail View Controller, and down in our table view function cell for row@, right at the end of the line that has tableview.dequeue reusable cell, remember we now want to subclass this with our custom table view cell. So after the right parenthesis, we'll say as exclamation point spot review table view cell. And I can get rid of these two placeholder comments, and we can refer to cell.review equals reviews.review array, open bracket, indexpath.row, close square bracket. Then let's build and run and see how things look. I'm going to open up my Firebase console just so we can get a look at what we should be pulling up. As a reminder, I'm in the document for Pino's Pizza, and I've got 2 reviews in the reviews collection. Now here's our app up and running, and just to check things out, I'm going to click on Crazy Dose first. We haven't put any reviews in there, so we got nothing in the table view. Head back, But then if we click on Pino's Pizza, hey, we see those 2 reviews in here. Our load data function's working great. What happens if I click on this best pizza near BC? And there we go. We show segue over. We see we've got the review title and the review in here properly. Excellent. Click on the back button. How about this other review? The title is fantastic and the review is Square Pizza is da bomb. What if I wanted to make a change here? In the title, I'm going to add comma my friend exclamation point. Then I'll click on save. And hey, when we segue back, we can see our snapshot listener is working perfectly because we can see the change that we just made in this second cell here. Nice. So this is all looking good, but there is a problem. There are actually a couple of problems with our code the way that it is currently written. Let's see what happens if we go back to the spot list view controller and then try to add a new spot by clicking on the plus sign. Now we get a crash, and it is a most unfriendly one. It hasn't stopped us on a recognizable line, it's actually crashed right at the class definition line of AppDelegate.Swift. Up until now, most of the time when we encountered one of these AppDelegate crashes, it was because we had a broken connection between our code and the IB outlet. Well here, this occurs because we tried to access a Cloud Firestore path with a document reference that doesn't exist. How come? Let's start by looking at the main storyboard. We can see that when you click on the plus button in Spot List View Controller, we segue to the Spot Detail View Controller. Then if we look at Spot Detail View Controller.Swift, we see we do a lot of setup, but then we hit this line here that looks to see if spot is nil, and in this case, since we added a brand new spot, we don't have a spot yet, so it is nil. And if that's the case, we call the convenience initializer with no parameters, and that initializes all the properties to empty strings and zeros. But that also means that the new spot has a document ID that's just an empty string. Now when we create a new document, we'll update this with a valid document ID, but we don't have a valid document ID at this point. It's just an empty string. Then we head down here to view will appear, and we try to load the reviews data for the spot by passing in this spot variable that we just created that's got empty values inside for all of its properties. So let's follow the code trail by opening up reviews and taking a look at the load data method. We try to add a snapshot listener on the spot that isn't valid. See, spot.documentID is in here, and that's an empty string. This is not a valid Firebase reference. This path does not exist. There's no saved spot document with a document ID of empty string, so that's why we crash. So how do we avoid this? Well, let's put some code right under the definition of our load data function here. So let's write the code first. Guard spot.documentID does not equal empty string, else, open and close curlies, return. So this guard statement checks to see if the spot value that we're passing in has a valid document ID. If it doesn't, then we'll use a guard statement to bounce out of the load data function. But otherwise, if we don't have an empty string for document ID, we'll continue and let the app run. Now, if we just added a new spot, there's no review data to load for the spot, so by bouncing out early, there's nothing that we've lost. In fact, this is a perfect use case for the guard statement. We essentially say, guard, bouncer of our load data function, check to see if every spot has a valid document ID. If it doesn't, bounce them out with a return statement. So let's build and run and see how this works. Our app is up and running. Let's click on the plus sign, moment of truth. And hey, will you look at that? No crashes, no problem. Our guard statement is bouncing us out. We don't see any reviews loading. We're not expecting any because there are no reviews for this brand new spot. Now we still have one more problem we're going to deal with. I'm going to look up a place. How about the Friendly Toast in Cambridge? Then I'm going to click on the ratings button. Now what this does is it takes us to an area where we can type in a new rating. It doesn't matter what you type in, but watch what happens when we save. Oh, another gnarly crash. In fact, we're getting an error pretty much like we had before where it says Firestore internal assertion failed, invalid document reference. Whenever we see that, we know the path that we're building, collection document, however deep that goes, collection document, must have some kind of error in it. And if you think what we're doing here, well, wait a second, we just added a new spot. Then we headed to reviews. And now we're trying to save a review, but we haven't yet saved that spot, so we still don't have a valid document ID for the spot. Even though we gave it a location, the Friendly Toast, we haven't saved it yet. So again, this is save data in review. We're going to hit this area down here where we refer to collection spots document spot.documentID, but spot.documentID continues to be the empty string. There is no document that exists that has a document ID of an empty string. This is invalid. That's why we got the error. That's why we got the crash. Now let me show you how we're going to fix this by running a completed version of the app. Now in this version, we can go ahead and add a new spot. We'll say it's the same Friendly Toast, but now look what happens when we press the ratings button to add a review. We get this 2-button alert that says, this venue has not been saved. You must save a venue before you can review it. And you get 2 options. You can select cancel or save. And then down here on the right, you can actually see some of the code that we're going to write. When the user presses that review button, we'll first check to see if the spot ID is an empty string. If it is, then we know we haven't saved the spot, so we present the user with this dialog. This is a helper function here that we'll write. It's not an Apple function, so that's this function called save, cancel, alert. It'll handle presenting the two buttons, the two alert actions, cancel and save, and handling the results if the user selects either of those. And we'll pass in a string for the title and a string for the alert message. Now the segue identifier is in there. It currently says add review. Eventually what we're going to do is we're going to use the same helper function if the user clicks on the photo button, because we'll have to save the spot for that as well. Now also note the else condition. If we do have a valid document ID, it's not an empty string. We're just going to go ahead and perform the segue. Now see what happens when we select cancel. No save, no segue, no error. But what if we click the review button again and this time we click save? Well, we don't see it, but behind the scenes, we've successfully saved the spot. Then we get a valid spot.documentID with that save. Then we perform our segue. We pass over our valid spot with its valid document ID to the review table view controller. So here you can put in anything you want. Title, how about get the toast? And review, how about toasty? And then we'll select save, and it saves the review successfully. We see it show up in the table view. No more errors. Nice. Let's code this up. So back in the spot detail view controller, I'm going to use the jump bar to jump to the function rating button pressed. Then I can delete the to-do comment. I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to put in an if statement. If spot.documentID equals empty string, open and close curlies, else open and close curlies. And for the else condition, I can highlight and cut out the perform segue and paste it in between the else curlies. And for the positive if condition, I need to write the function I'm going to call first. This is the function that presents the alert asking if the user wants to save the spot. And I'm going to put this function just after the prepare for segue function and just before the leave view controller function. And I'll say func save cancel alert is what I'll call the function, open parens. The first parameter is title, :string, comma, message, :string, comma, and then I'll pass in segue identifier, :, and that's also a string. Open and close curlies. Now we're going to create and present an alert controller. Remember, there are 4 steps for that. So first we'll declare the alert controller, then we'll create the 2 alert actions that we want, then we'll add those 2 alert actions to the alert controller, and finally we'll present the alert controller. So we'll say let alert controller equals UI alert controller, open parens, and you want to select this option with the title and the message. Our title is going to be title, our message is going to be message, and our preferred style is going to be .alert. Then the next line, let's create our first action. We'll call it save action. Let save action equals UI alert action, open parens. Select the option with the title and the style. The title is going to be the string save. That's the name of the button. The style will be .default. And for the handler, let's double click on this to get the trailing closure format, and we'll go back and we'll add the handler code in there in just a bit. But let's finish the rest of the alert controller. On the line below this, we'll say let cancel alert equals UI alert action, open parens, with the title and the style. The title is going to be the string cancel. Again, that's the name of the button that will show up. The style will be .cancel, and the handler will be nil. Then we want to add these 2 actions, and the way that we do that is we say alert controller .add action, open parens, and add save action, then alert controller .add action, open parens, and let's add cancel action to that one. Then we simply say present, select this one here with the parameter view controller to present, and for that parameter we'll pass in alert controller. For animated we'll pass in true, and for the completion handler we'll pass in nil. Now let's finish off this completion handler at the end of save action. Remember, this is the code that's going to execute if somebody clicks on the save button. So for the UI alert action, we can ignore that. We'll just put in underscore. But for the code, we want to save data. So we'll say self.spot.save data. You see we got the completion handler in here. I'm going to double click to get the trailing closure format. For bool, I'm going to put in success. And after in, I'm going to say self.perform segue with the identifier, segue identifier, and with the sender nil. Don't forget, we got to call this function though, so let's head back down to our rating button pressed, and we'll call it in the first part of the if closure by typing in save cancel alert. Code completion knows about this, so select that. Our title is going to be this venue has not been saved, and the message will be you must save this venue before you can review it. Then we need a segue identifier that's just going to be the string add review in upper camel case. This is looking good. Let's build and run and see what we got. Here's our app. Let's repeat all the steps before that caused the crash, and hopefully it won't happen this time. We'll click on plus to add a new spot. We'll look up place. We'll find the friendly toast and select that. We zoom over, let's click on the rating button, and ho, we get that alert with two options, cancel and save. First test canceled, no problem, we don't save, we remain entering our spot. Let's click on rating again, click on save. Looks like it's saved okay. Let's give this a review title, Toasty. And how about the review? Get the toast. Click on save, and hey, there we go. Our review is showing underneath the friendly toast. We got quite a bit to do to clean up the user interface and make it behave the way the user would expect. In the next video, we'll make sure we get those star buttons working. But Swifter, your app is looking snappy. Feel good about those skills and keep at it.